I'd like to call this meeting to order. If you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, present this evening are myself, Mayor Marl, Council Members Burgoyne, Gearbaugh, Cybo Koenig left us. She went home sick. Council Member Rhodes, Roth, and Tahar. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, City Superintendent, Rubel, City Treasurer Bennett, DPW Director Fordyce, and is Chief Rennick here this evening? Maybe he isn't. Okay. At this time, I would seek a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Staff asked me earlier this afternoon, staff being Mr. Campbell and DPW Director Fordyce, if they could bring an additional item to the agenda, and I permitted that for your review and discussion. It will be at the end of new business. There's an addendum that's been printed off by our clerk's office that was placed at your seat prior to tonight's meeting. It's new business item C-14-116. It's 2006 Vector repairs. And again, we'll get to that at the end of new business. And then we have two additional discussion items. One is the employee contracts that we didn't get to at our work meeting. The second is two budget requests that have been submitted in writing by Councilmember Rhodes. And then I also want to acknowledge that when we get to the consent agenda, we will be removing and bringing back at our subsequent meeting in June item C-14-105, the proclamation in support of funding the Willow Run Bomber Plant. After speaking to a few of my colleagues, we feel it would be a little bit more appropriate to put that on official city proclamation paper with the seal and everything. So I'll work with the clerk's office to prepare that and submit it to you in advance of our next meeting. Obviously important, and we want to show our support. Are there any additional, there's one other additional correction. Darby Colano from Reinhardt Realtors, who is going to be here to update us on the Monroe Street property and the sale of it. She will not be here this evening, but she will be presenting at our next meeting in 2 weeks. So we'll strike that from the presentations. I apologize for all the changes. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Burgoyne. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. At this time, I would seek a motion to excuse the absence of Councilwoman Cybo Koenig.
So moved.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar and seconded by Councilmember Gearbaugh. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to our first and only presentation this evening, which is the Community Engagement Forum PowerPoint presentation regarding Granicus Mine Mixer, and Open Town Hall. And this will be presented by our City Clerk, Ms. Royal. So I will turn it over to her.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? As part of the 2014-15 Goals Visioning Session, building community spirit and civic engagement was discussed. Today, we are looking at online portals designed to enhance community engagement. We hope to encourage citizens' ideas, gain feedback on initiatives, and prioritize community interests. 3 community forum applications were researched: Mind Mixer, Open Town Hall, and Granicus. I will be showing you applications that are currently being used in other communities. Mind Mixer was featured in the review as part of the Muskegon's master plan information gathering process. It was in the review March, April, I believe. This is a sample of a question that was asked through Mind Mixer, and at the top right-hand corner, although it's hard to see, it shows that it was posted on March 11th, There have been 35 interactions, and there is 1 day remaining for input. This is the same question after the question has closed for input. And at the top, it will show that it is closed, but it's really small. You can also see that the activity shows people's responses to the question that was asked by the township, and then a DPW director responded to one of the ideas. And on the right, you can see who is actually listening. And on this particular forum, it is the township manager, the planning director, and the township supervisor. Once the topic is closed, you can gather data about how many participants, the age groups, and the breakdown of percentages between male and female. This one obviously didn't have a large one, but this was the one I was using for. For Mind Mixer, their idea is to have people join, contribute, and connect. The next one I looked at was Open Town Hall, which is also called Peak Democracy, but I call it Open Town Hall because it's on all these slides as that. It has a large database of sample questions, which would be helpful for the city, that you don't have to go back and research what questions to ask your community. They also have software that monitors comments to remove any that are not civil. This is a sample of a question. You can see who is listening, any feedback, your statement, and the outcome. When you click across the different things, it gives you to a different view. I tried to put them all on there, but it would have been much longer. This one shows that Doug House, who lives outside Sugar Land, responded. If the person is within the city, it would show this person responded within the city is. After the subject is closed, it will show how many people commented, the number of hours of public comment, and how many people clicked to read the question. This one had 41 comments, but 275 people actually read the post. And the last one I researched was Granicus. Granicus is a much larger company, and it deals with government transparency in all forms. They go from electronic packets, webcasting, online searches, and community forums, are just a few. Each component has its own fees involved. Granicus goes with the focus on important issues, involve the community, and respond with results. Questions or ideas can be posted by residents, businesses, city officials, and even people with that outside of the community. Here is a question about skunks in the downtown area. Here we have a city question being asked. You can respond to questions multiple times. All three, Mind Mixer, Open Town Hall, and Granicus, allow residents to set up an account using email, Facebook, or LinkedIn. This helps identify age, location, and gender of those who are responding. Phone apps are also available with these applications. And in conclusion, once the system is implemented, or if the system is implemented, the city manager would be responsible for the information that is put online. The city would use social media, newspaper, Facebook, Twitter, to engage public in the forum and let them know it's available. And then the important part is the results of the questionnaires would be posted online. And the important part is the cost. Mind Mixer is $4,375 per year. Open Town Hall is $6,000 per year. And Granicus is $9,600 per year. Any questions?
Are there any questions for our city clerk? Start with you, Mr. Rhodes.
How does the software on the Open Town Hall determine if a person is a city resident or not?
There's a map that you can outline, and then it also goes with your email address, because when you set up your email, you put your address, your physical street and your zip code. And it's not 100% accurate, but at least get you within the radius of where the one Open Town Hall actually has a map, and it will show you the pinpoints of where the people are responding.
Or at least where their computer is responding from.
Right.
Right.
So
Okay.
none of them are 100% accurate for these are city residents.
Okay. Thank you.
All of them do require you to have some kind of an account, though, set up.
Let me go to Mr. Gearbaugh next, then Mr. Roth, and then we'll come down here to Mr. Burgoyne.
So in that setup, there's required fields specifically, so if you're, to make sure that you're actually getting individuals with the Saline address or whatever address they're coming from, is it required as part of the login, or?
It's not required, the email is required, because with all three of these, you have to have an email that is active, and then once you sign up, you have to go into the email and activate your account. So you have to have, it doesn't say that I could live in Tecumseh and say that I have a Saline address.
But somehow you have to go in and create an account and validate the information within that, okay?
Correct.
The other aspect of when the reporting and such, what kind of validating is there and such that you can go through and look at whether or not the individuals are actually valid or real people? You have to have an account, it's required to?
You have to have an account in order to sign in or comment on any of these.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Roth?
I'm looking at the cost. Is 1 year a minimum contract?
Yes.
Now, how are we going to evaluate if this system is worth our investment? What kind of criteria should we make?
Well, that is a council decision. It was, again, I went with the idea that council wanted to engage the community, and this was a way of doing that. This is what the new wave is out there, so to speak. People have their phones, they have computers. Whenever you could sign up to get notified whenever a new question is put on the website, so your phone would buzz and let you know there's been an update. It's different people like it. I mean, it's working in other communities. Most of those communities are a lot larger than we are, but it is working in other communities.
Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Roth?
Well, I'm just looking at thinking for as blogs. If you had a blog that doesn't cost something like this, it could be put on a city website. You can get lots of the same data from having a blog. It would just require maybe a little bit more work. Yeah. So I'm just looking at far as an expense. It's a nice tool, but I'm not sure. And since we have it here, it's the first time I've seen the financial part of it. So I'm kind of questioning what the worth is, if we should try it, and how are we actually going to evaluate it. So these are some questions I have before joining in on it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, Mr. Roth, you're absolutely right. I mean, we do have some tools currently, and we do use them a little bit, such as social media, Facebook, our Saline City and the e-newsletter that goes out, those types of things. But, I mean, so it's similar information. So to answer that question is, I mean, we do have similar tools currently to get some of those messages out. But again, and just like this would be limited to the people that are signed up, and certainly if we were to go this direction, we would market it and try and get people to sign up and that type of thing, because obviously the more people we have signed up that we can expose the information to and get feedback from, that's what we want. And that's, as the staff understands this, the intent of this would be to have a more specific, refined tool, I guess, to ask those certain questions at any given time, as opposed to, doing an annual or every few year survey, if you will.
Mr. Burgoyne? Then we'll get you, Mr. Gearbaugh, again.
Well, I'm in favor of more communications, and I don't think $9,600 is too much. So that's first thing. In terms of signing up, have you looked at the sign-up process to determine how long it took you to sign up, or, to go through this, or, an average person, how long does it take? Can you sign up and take a survey response the same day?
Yes, I signed up for all three of them just to give it a try. I wanted
How,
to,
how long does it take?
less than 5 minutes.
Oh.
I mean, it's like signing up for an email account. You put in just your general information, then they send you an email to verify this is a valid account, that it's an active account, and you take that, it says click here, you click there, and it opens up, and it says you are now able to comment on these forums. So,
Okay, so you also said that, and I also have heard about Granicus. You also said that Granicus is larger, and it seems to have some more already set up formats and areas and so forth. And I think it's helpful not to reinvent the wheel and not to just try to do something on your own and you have to process it, which takes time, a lot of staff time. It's easy to spend a lot of staff time and effort on something you try to do on the side. So I would rather have something proven that a lot of people like. One way that I assess things is if it's really popular in a lot of communities and it's grown to be a fairly significant company, there must be something good about it. And as you look at it, you see that.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
The one thing I'm wondering about which software to go with, we should be integrating whatever we have with our water and billing, See-Click Fix, and this. So I would hope that whatever we do, we don't have 3 separate logons, and I don't know how we can look at that in the future and fix that. Every time we add a new function, I'm glad that we do it. Unfortunately, you usually end up having to add another thing to it. So whichever of these can be expanded or incorporated with what we currently have is probably the better one to go with. I didn't know what the difference is because the cost is such significance. And you were saying Granicus is bigger, but is there more functionality to one versus the other?
I didn't find any. The community forum is a relatively new portion to all 3 of these.
Okay.
So, and I don't know the answer, but I can check and check. I think Granicus you can log in, but I'm not positive. So I would rather check into that, and I'll get back with you on that.
And our See-Click Fix doesn't have this potential?
See-Click Fix is a standalone app.
Okay. I didn't know if they had a module or something that might add into it, so.
Not from, I talked to Chris, and from what I understand, it would not be in with one of these.
Got it. Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. Nope, that's fine.
I actually, as a follow-up to Mr. Gearbaugh's question, Clerk Royal, I would be interested in confirming that, whether any of these systems could be integrated with what we currently offer. I think that's an excellent point. And then secondarily, as my colleagues will recall, we've talked about Granicus to some extent in the past, and then additionally, Councilmember Rhodes, myself, Clerk Royal, and City Manager Campbell participated probably 2 or 3 months ago on a conference call with one of their representatives to talk about the service in a little bit more depth. And I'm not convinced that Granicus is the best fit for the city of Saline. And I'm intrigued by Open Town Hall and Mind Mixer. And I guess the 2 questions I would have is I'd like to identify beyond the city of Muskegon some other municipalities that use these technologies and how successful they have been. And what they identify as weaknesses. And then secondarily, I think staff probably needs to do some analysis in-house to determine that if we go with any one of these 3 technologies, who's going to be the point person on staff to maintain them, to oversee it, and how does that fit into that individual's theoretically already pretty heavy, substantial workload. And of course, you want to make sure you have a person who has access to the appropriate information so that they can respond, and their response can be effective and appreciated by the individual who's petitioning the city to do something or raising a question or concern. So those are some questions that I have. Mr. Rhodes had his hand up, and then I'll get to you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Do all 3 of these software packages allow for residents to initiate comments back to the city, or do some of them limit it to just responding to questions that the city puts out?
Open Town Hall, you can only ask questions. The city would only be able to put the questions out. With both Mind Mixer and Granicus, they can both, the residents could ask a question of the city, or a business could ask a question of the city. Open town hall only allows you to have one comment, and it is only a one-way street. It's a comment, are you happy with the way the streets are in the city of Saline? And then you comment on that. There's no give and take on that. And once you've commented yes or no, your conversation's done. You can't go back and forth. There's no discussion after that.
Based on that information, I would not support doing even any more investigation into the open town hall, because that doesn't meet what we were trying to do, in my opinion.
I just wanted to give you 3 to
Yeah.
at least view.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Tahar?
Yes, thank you. Part of my question, Mr. Rhodes has already addressed. In more general terms, you've mentioned who would oversee the tool. I think we also need to have a clear plan from the council side about what we want to accomplish with this. And, it could be a great tool, but if we don't have a systematic way of using it, a plan for putting out questions or for initiating dialogue, we have another great tool that nobody uses. So I think it's really important to think about, we have a general idea, we want to communicate more, but what exactly do we want to accomplish?
I think that point is well taken, and obviously we need to define the goal, but to sort of piggyback on something that Mr. Rhodes commented on, or he asked a good question about open town hall, I suspect that the benefit from utilizing, well, probably MindMixer or Granicus, is the comments and questions and concerns that are provided proactively by our citizens, as opposed to throwing out questions from City Hall or from council. Not that couldn't be done, and on occasion that could certainly prove to be effective, but I think any of these technologies are better served when it's an additional platform for citizens or businesses to articulate questions or concerns.
Right. Yes, I would agree. Although I think both are important. We've talked about using this kind of tool to replace the every 3, 4, whatever year survey we've done.
Yeah.
Potentially. I'm not advocating that necessarily, but.
Let me ask this question. So obviously staff needs to do a little bit more investigating and vetting, but based on the comment that Mr. Rhodes asked, is anybody still in favor of moving forward and investigating open town hall more? No? Mr. Roth? No? Okay. So I think we can eliminate that one. Mr. Burgoyne?
I think that we have the FII newsletter that goes out with our utility billing, and we have our city website as a platform. It seems as though with the C-click fix and this type of thing and so forth, we have some platforms to get the word out, and maybe we get the word out some other ways, like over the air, and so forth. So it would be good to get more involvement once it gets going. So is there some way that we can have something on the first page of the website, for example, that would let you, go to pay your bill or go to talk about a problem that you see click fix, or go to a discussion, or, a little bit of rearrangement of the first page in some way so that citizens feel they have access.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we could do that. We may need to redesign that front page a little bit. Just because there's the pictures, which are terrific, but they take up a lot of space. So
They take time to load too.
Sure, certainly. But they do. There's a lot of important information on that squashed into that first page, that homepage. So we could certainly make that, and I think that would be appropriate for that. But just so you all know, we may need to redesign and squash it a little bit.
I think to piggyback on what Mr. Burgoyne says, I think that's an excellent place to promote and to plug these additional tools for citizens to engage with city government. And evidently, I think that it's appropriate on probably a 2 or 3 year basis to sort of refresh and enhance the homepage of your website, whether you be a municipal unit of government, a business, or a nonprofit. And as it relates to some pictures, there's some pictures on our website. The one that drives me crazy is Weller's Banquet Facility, which looks like the old red barn. That it was that color for 20 years, but it hasn't been that color since I think 2011. So I think those sort of routine fresh ups to, especially the homepage of your website, is vitally important. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yeah, I wanted to support that too, because I think part of the problem with our website too is it takes so long to load no matter what you're doing, and it may need a redesign or a whole infrastructure change in the back of it. So whatever we need to do is potentially putting that forward in our budget for this coming year. I'd like to see that addressed somehow. The other piece, is there any open source type software that does this that we could use, that if we're not going to do such a huge analysis and assessment, because that's the problem. I think we start getting into a software package and then we have to use it and we have to pay for it. There's a lot of free things out there that potentially do the same thing. And I'm not saying that if it means more hours of work that we shouldn't go that route, but just curious, and I don't know, just one of the things to consider. So.
Very good. Do you feel like you have some direction?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation.
Good work.
Yeah.
Good thoughts. You can tell you're a librarian.
Nice job, Terry.
Organizing thoughts.
Okay, we move on now to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Mary Hess, 14113 Leather Bucket Alley. Communication is very, very important. I've always believed in it, and I always still try to do it. I think the problem that is being proposed with this 3-year proposed contract for the alley right-of-way, that all the adjoining property owners should have been addressed with this proposal. They could have come up with information or questions over the last year. Linda from the Waggles and Whiskers, she does my dogs, so she had no idea that this was on the agenda. She has never seen this proposed contract. And she owns that building on the whole side of the alley. We went through this last year as a public comment, as far as at that point she was going to rent the front of the store. Well, you can't take away somebody's side door. The other thing is, in walking and observing, there will be no smoking with alcohol on the premises. So therefore, it appears that all the cigarette butts are going down behind Benny's Bakery or behind the Tux place. I walked it. There's cigarette butts all over. In fact, there's a bucket in the bucket, whatever alley, that has water in it, and it's floating with cigarettes. I also noticed that the flower baskets or whatever, they still have the old Christmas tree limbs on them. No one's cared at all to take the old Christmas things down. I would hope we wouldn't have to pay. I would think that this is important enough for a public hearing. I am a minute owner of the alley. Why can't we have a public hearing to hear comments from other people? We went through this route with alleys a long time ago. And I think information should be given and afforded to all the adjoining property owners and their comments and their signatures, that they understand what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there any additional citizen comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I see that the Willow Run Bomber Plant Memorial has been taken off
Yes.
today, but I still would get some benefit out of talking about this rather than just having the proclamation come to us next time?
Okay, well, why don't we talk about it then under reports and other announcements?
Okay.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
There are additional citizen comments? No, then we move on to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move to approve as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Roth. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to old business, item 14-103. This is a Celtic Festival agreement. This will be a motion to acknowledge the receipt of the May 13th, 2014 memo from Treasurer Bennett and to approve and adopt, or not to adopt, the proposed agreement between the City of Saline and the Friends of the Festival.
Move to approve and adopt.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Of course, this is returning from our last meeting, but Ms. Bennett, do you care to make any additional comments?
I just wanted to point out to you that after the last meeting, I did go back and talked with our legal counsel as well as the Friends of the Festival and the festival chairperson from the City Commission, Terry and Amber, those ladies. We did modify the agreement to include that some language there that will allow, that would request the Friends to submit their reports to us for City Council for review periodically. And we also added language in there that under the remedies that this clause would also allow us to pursue action against the individuals of the Friends of the Festival. But I also wanted to kind of point out and go over some of the things that we did talk about. And after going through and reading through the bylaws, the 501c3 application, and the policy and procedures that Terry has put together, and just as a pecking order, Terry is on the festival committee, which is a city-appointed committee through the city, and so she is the treasurer for the city's commission. Amber is the treasurer for the Friends, and I am the treasurer for the city. So there will be three treasurers, all representing separate entities, reviewing all of this documentation. It also, in the procedures, does state that the city treasurer will deposit the funds. So any advancement that we will be giving them would be deposited by myself into their checking account at their bank. And then that would require two signatures to withdraw those funds. And it would also require according to the policy and procedures as set up by the treasurer of the festival, it would also require that no funds be withdrawn without an invoice or substantiating that. So there would have to be substantial documentations requesting any withdrawal of those funds. So that kind of puts into place a little bit more of a checks and balance per se to accommodate some securities. And I also asked Amber and Terry to look into being insured and bonded, and I think Amber has a brief report for you also. And then I did check with the some comments or concerns about how this was making this more difficult than, say, the farmer's market or the Friends of the fire department. And I did check with the fire department, and that is a separate entity. Everything is kept completely separate, a separate set of books, a separate account, a tax ID number. And as far as the farmer's market, that's one person handling money outside of myself. And with the Celtic Festival, there's an extensive, there's a great deal of other people responsible for those funds. So there's a little bit of a difference there. By no means, I have been working with both the Festival Commission and the Friends of the Festival to get this so that we could, as kind of directed by this board, put them on their own and have them, be standalone and self-sufficient. So this is a step in that direction. That's by no means trying to wash our hands or be rid of the festival. It's only trying to encourage their support. So with that, I think Amber does have some information that you were going to share. Insurance? Or? Or maybe Terry did.
Real quick, ladies, I appreciate you being here. You're welcome to come up. I want to make sure there are no questions for Ms. Bennett first, and I believe Mr. Burgoyne has one. Councilmember Burgoyne?
Yeah. The amount will be over $25,000, so the standalone will have to file a Form 990. And also, how will the standalone be audited? Will they have an audit, an annual audit?
They have to have all of that done on their own, under their 501c3 requirements. Their books are going to be completely separate from ours. So yes, they will have to have an annual audit.
There additional questions? No. Ladies, do you care to comment at all? Terry, Amber, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. To answer your question, the Friends does file their 990s annually. Everything is filed timely. The auditors, we're looking into, one of the things that I asked them, I asked on behalf of the city that they contract an auditor to audit their books annually for their protection, as well as the cities and the festivals. It's just how things are done in the 501c3 world. So those things are on their way. For the 2014 festival, we will indeed, at the close of the fiscal year, have an audit report that we'll provide to Mickey Joe so that that's maintained in the files, and we'll present it to council as well.
Additional questions? Mr. Rhodes?
I'm associated with several other 501c3s who do not always have an audit every year because the expense of an audit, but they have a review periodically and then an audit like every 3 years. I don't know if that's something that could be considered to keep your expenses down.
Yeah, we're actually hoping to get a commitment as a volunteer auditor from one of the firms that I work with. We're hoping somebody will do it for free.
That's even less expensive.
I'm cheap.
Additional questions? Mr. Burgoyne?
In terms of the Friends of the Library, the Friends of the Fire Department, and so forth, do they have audits each year? I think they may not. I think Mr. Rhodes may be more in line with that. And I was not trying to pose questions. What I see here is that I actually think we're making the process more difficult for the folks who want to do a Celtic festival by imposing this. I would have preferred for us to keep the Celtic festival within the city, within the city's books and so forth. And I know that there is, cash handling and cash deposits and needing to do that quickly and so forth, but that's only a short part during the active festival. And I wish that this would have been handled more simply. I don't prefer it this way.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Additional comments? Mr. Gearbaugh?
I just appreciate your work you've done on this, Mickey Joe, to get this straightened out, because I think some of the questions I have is just because of the materiality and the size of what we're contributing towards the festival and how the whole operations, and then how you're working towards becoming very self-sufficient, I think is working as the way we want to see it go forward. And I do think that we've tried to simplify this, because I'd like to take a lot of this activity out of Mickey Joe's hands so that we have less time being used towards some things and going towards other activities that we need to manage. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Additional comments? No? Ladies, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time and work on this issue. Obviously, this was a direction given by council, and as Mr. Gearbaugh stated, I don't want to steal his thunder. I think this is a step in the right direction. So thank you. Additional comments? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearbaugh, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar to approve and adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and the motion carries 6-1. We proceed now to old business item 14-84. This is the community events policy coming back for, I think, a third discussion. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 12th, 2014 memo from City Clerk Royal and to approve or not to approve the revised community event policy as submitted. Is there a motion?
So moved.
To approve, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. Clerk Royal, do you care to comment at all?
No, the only thing that was requested
The only thing that was requested was that we add nonprofit and that there would be a way to have a review for somebody who wanted to have an event during the year. And those two items were added.
Very good. Are there any questions for Clerk Royal? Mr. Burgoyne, question?
So I see under application procedure that the applications must be submitted at least 2 months before the proposed date of the event. However, aren't these events going to be approved like once during the year and then only make exceptions beyond that?
Yes, so the 2 month would be for any new event.
I don't, again, I do not like the way in which this is being made more complicated. I think it was more flexible the original way, and not in favor of the complexity of this change.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Are there additional questions for Clerk Royal? No questions? Additional comments? No additional comments? Okay. Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, late hand. I just want to say, I especially appreciate item 3. I think this is kind of where this whole discussion began. Having enumerated and clarified what our criteria are when we're reviewing applications is really helpful. I think that, we've talked about the history of, oh yes, this is the kind of thing we waive fees for, but many of us didn't know this is the kind of thing. So it's really good to have it clearly described.
I would echo those comments, Mayor Pro Tem. I think it's very important in terms of written policy to have a criteria and a set of benchmarks by which entities and events can qualify for our support. And evidently, those items came about after a pretty robust discussion. In fact, I think most of them were recommended or articulated by Mr. Burgoyne. So I think this is similar to the previous motion. I think this is a step in the right direction. And I in particular, appreciate all the work that City Clerk Royal has put into to this policy. So thank you very much. Mr. Burgoyne?
Yeah, I would like to also say that I do appreciate the work that staff has put in, and I also agree with item 4 with the listing of these does make it clearer. So that is a very beneficial portion of this policy. This was what Mr. Roth had been bringing up about needing to clarify. I'm glad we did the process.
Thank you, sir. If there's nothing further, it's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Rhodes to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it. Motion carries 5 to 1. The previous motion was 5 to 1 as well. I apologize for not noting Ms. Cybo Koenig's absence. My faux pas. We move on now to new business, item 14-107. This is the People's Express contract for fiscal year 15. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 15th, 2014 memo from DPW Director Fordyce and to approve or not to approve a one-year contract with People's Express in the amount of $45,423.
Motion to approve for a 3-year term of contract for People's Express. Considering that we have a way of ending it if we so choose. But I would like to make a motion that we do it for 3 years because they have a 3-year grant to take the people out of town. They have a way of providing us a fair
Let's deal with the
contract
motion,
amount.
Mr. Burgoyne. We can get into the dialogue and discussion about the merits of it after we see if there's a second. Is there a second to Mr. Burgoyne's motion to approve the contract for 3 years? I ask again, is there a second? That motion dies for lack of a second. Again, is there a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 15th, 2014 memo from DPW Director Fordyce to approve or not to approve a one-year contract with People's Express in the amount of $45,423?
Motion to approve for 1 year.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second? Second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. Mr. Fordyce, do you care to comment at all?
At our last meeting, there were a few additional questions regarding the use of the grant bus. Spoke with People's Express, and the question was whether or not we could put non-grant eligible riders on the grant bus. And the answer is yes, but the city would be charged the amount that the grant would have provided, which is $1.12 per mile. So it's possible, but it's difficult to put that into a contract with a fixed amount, because our costs for transporting individuals on that bus would be determined by actual ridership. Another question was whether we could utilize the in-town bus for out-of-town trips for individuals who are not eligible for the grant bus. And yet the answer for that obviously is yes. That's our choice, how we want to use that, the bus that we fund. And we could change the rate schedule for out-of-town trips to match the grant-funded bus, so there wouldn't be any economic reasons to try to use one bus over the other one for the individuals. And People's Express estimated that 80 to 90% of the current out-of-town riders would meet the eligibility requirements of the grant.
Real quick on the first point, that if an individual utilizes the out-of-town van or bus to get to an appointment at U of M Medical Center or St. Joe Health System, and they're not eligible, the city gets charged $1.22 per mile, is that correct?
$1.12 per mile.
$1.12 per mile, excuse me. And there's no way that People's Express could work on an arrangement between the service and the rider, for the rider to cover the cost, if that's the individual's wish?
I mean, they're collecting for the
Have the
Right,
rider
anyways.
pay the full cost.
I mean, if a rider doesn't qualify under the terms of the grant to utilize the service to go out of town, for whatever reason, I don't see why the rider shouldn't assume the liability, if People's Express can make that work.
I believe we could make that work.
Okay. And then the second point, which I think I heard pretty consistently at the last meeting, Jeff, is that there was desire, I think almost unanimous desire, to keep that first bus in the city during the entire shift. That the goal or the benefits of accessing the grant through the ride is to have another bus that will leave town, but also that it would then allow that one bus to be here for the entire shift. We'll start with Mr. Rhodes and then go to Mr. Gearbaugh.
I've taken the same position that the mayor just articulated, and that is the grant will pay for riders who are seniors, disabled, or going to work. And for someone to take that out-of-town bus that doesn't fit that, I think they should pay for whatever that cost is, and it becomes their choice if they want to do it or not. And I like the idea of keeping bus number 1 within the town limits, or within the areas defined by People's Express, which exceeds the city limits a bit, based on the fact that they had to turn down a number of requests for rides within the city last year because of unavailability of bus. So I support the position that the mayor articulated.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Gearbaugh?
And I know I've asked this before, but I just want to clarify how this grant's working on this. So what we're paying for is the exact same thing we were paying for last year, because this grant sounded like it was new and is now going to subsidize part of what we were paying for last year. Am I wrong in thinking that way?
The grant is new.
Okay.
The grant will provide a second bus for out-of-town trips
Okay.
for seniors, handicapped, and people going to work.
So last year, we had the same bus
We have
that was,
one bus that the
doing
city
both.
funded that was trying to cover both.
so we're paying, so how much more are we getting now that, I'm assuming that all these outside trips are going to be paid for on this grant,
Yes.
Correct.
correct? So now we have this internal bus, for which we're paying approximately another $1,300 this year, and it won't be going out of town. And
Correct.
how much more hours and functions are we getting as a result of that, since it isn't going out of town?
We're not getting any more hours. It's the same number of hours of service, but what's being proposed here tonight is restricting that bus to in-town. And the estimate, based on their call activity, is that there'll be an additional 600 in-town rides that they'll be able to serve because the other bus is taking care of the out-of-town rides.
And that cost is offsetting what we would have paid for the out-of-town trips last year?
We just pay it's an hourly rate, basically.
Okay.
We buy the bus for 8 hours a day, whether it's out of town, in town, whatever or the current contract, whatever destination it's going to, we're paying the same hourly rate.
Okay, that's where I wanted clarification on.
And real quick, if I may, just to expand on a question that Mr. Gearbaugh just asked. That 600 number is based, if I'm not correct, on last year's data, which indicates that 600 rides were denied because the bus was leaving Saline for whatever reason.
Correct.
Okay.
So good, so we're expanding in-town service, and then we're going to have the grant to do with the out-of-town, and I agree with my colleagues about paying the extra $1, $12, whatever, by the rider who wants to participate in it, because that's a reasonable cost to be able to use the bus, and I don't think we need to subsidize it if they're not qualifying.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Mr. Burgoyne?
Well, I agree with my three colleagues in their comments, and I also have a very brief question. The contract that we're looking at now for purchase of service, is this contract just for in-town?
We would have to change the service area. There's, in the contract as it's written right now, there's a defined service area that includes the out-of-town destinations. So that paragraph would have to be rewritten.
Okay, well, the direction was that we wanted to have a bus ourselves that would just be in town because it was a grant for out of town. The motion that I made supports using our bus for in town. So that's what I want to approve. So however the language needs to be changed, I think it should be.
Sure. Reference the cleanup language. We'll work with the city attorney's office to clean up that language. And so if you wanted to put,
Subject to approval.
right, subject to approval of city attorney.
Yeah, that's fine. I will amend my motion to make it subject to approval that this bus would just be in town.
I accept that amendment.
Very good. So that addendum will immediately follow the dollar amount of $45,423. Okay? Mr. Roth and then Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
I'd like to have a definite clarification what is meant by in town. If it's exact borders for the city of Saline or this little diagram here, because wondering if the schools, the high school would be included part as in town or not.
Mr. Fordyce, can you comment on that?
He said yes.
I'm trying, could you show which diagram you were
It's
pulling up
this
there?
bullet thing that's not too clear.
Mr.
as
Anderson
the
distributed at our work meeting.
Definitive as far as what the roads are.
It's in town.
Mr. Mayor, I recall that Mr. Anderson said the circle would include up to Walmart and include the schools and so forth, because that was considered our central area, that it actually went a little bit beyond the city, the actual city boundary.
Yeah.
That would not be my understanding, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, they interchangeably use the term in-town and local. So it is roughly a 1 mile radius of the center of town.
Okay.
So
So
it does
that does
have,
on occasion go beyond the corporate limits of the city of Saline?
yes.
Okay.
So I think that the language should say local
Okay.
rather than in town, just so we don't have any dispute over that in the future.
Then I think that would be, fall under the addendum that Mr. Burgoyne offered.
Well, actually, I would accept that word as a change, instead of saying in town borders.
Within the document, you
local-
mean?
Local.
Within
yeah.
the document, within the contract?
Or within my motion also. I don't mind the motion saying it appropriately. Local is the way it was presented. That's fine.
Well, since the geographic boundaries are not stipulated in the motion, I think it would be more appropriate to change the contract.
All right. All right.
Which I think we can probably do without objection.
All right.
Okay? Ms. Tahar?
One moment, please. Sorry, it's gone.
Okay.
I'll raise my hand
Yep,
again.
Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification, Jeff, I want to make sure, so the local is different from the additional proposal that People's Express had proposed for the additional one where the one that's labeled, it's a Google, taken off of Google Maps, and it has downtown, Liberty School, Meyer, Briarwood, Costco, Walmart, that loop, I just want to make sure that's additional. That's an additional amount.
Yeah, and based on previous
Correct.
discussions, that's off.
Right, I know
off the table.
it's well beyond the 1 mile radius. I just want to make sure for clarification.
So
that
it does
everyone-
not reach Walmart, but it does reach the schools, right?
Yes.
Well, yeah, a mile from,
Okay,
Reach the high school.
okay.
Ms. Tahar?
Yes, thank you. To come back to something Mr. Gearbow raised earlier about, so what additional benefits or improvements might we see since we're restricting ourselves to local coverage, in town, whatever we're calling it. The last time I looked at the People's Express website, it still specifies must call 3 days in advance. I confess I haven't looked at it in the last week. But I would certainly hope that we could see an improvement in that aspect of the service if the bus is in fact operating only locally. And potentially other benefits. I mean, I am also fully in favor of keeping the service, keeping the bus operating just locally. First of all, because I'd like to see better service. And secondly, because I think it's essential for us to have a year of experience with just local service so we can get a sense of what the need and the demand is. Because I think under the present circumstances, we don't understand that anymore. And as was pointed out early on in this discussion, from the time that we've had service from People's Express till now, a lot of things have changed within the city. The hospital is a much different place and not necessarily a destination. So it's not necessarily clear to me what kind of service we need, but I really think we need a year to just look at local service and what the demand is.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Mr. Gearbow, do you have additional comments?
Just real quick, when we talk local services, where are the stops? Is it the hospital, the shopping centers?
It's door to
Just
door.
It's
door to door.
service.
So if I call, okay, I just want to make sure there wasn't any other pickup spots where we could do that. Okay.
Real quick, Jeff, before we proceed to vote, because Mayor Pro Tem Tahar brought this up, and I believe it was Councilmember Rhodes who brought it up when we met with Mr. Anderson on the issue of the call-ahead. Can we continue to push them to look at that, especially considering that after tonight, we will have a bus in town for our entire shift? And then secondarily, and I recall Mr. Anderson accepting this suggestion outright, which was, I know, articulated by Councilmember Rhodes, which is to change the verbiage slightly on their promotional material on the website, which says, you know, to guarantee a spot, you need to call 3 days ahead. However, we will try our best to accommodate you.
Yeah. And that's certainly how it's done in practice.
Right.
They do take calls with less than 3 days. And
But I think it
accommodate
turns some people off when they see
Yeah.
that rather strident verbiage on promotional materials or on the website. And again, if we're going to get a better reflection of how our people are utilizing the service and what the demand is for public transit, I think that would be a good change. I want to keep moving though, folks. So real quick, Mr. Burgoyne and then Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
Okay, well, I support Mayor Pro Tem's comment about reducing the amount of time. If this bus doesn't get out of the community and get strayed, you know, stuck out there outside the community, I don't see why they need to call 3 days ahead. Is there language in the contract documents, or is this outside the contract documents? And could they go back to the 2 days ahead that they used to have before, just for the in-town, just
Yeah.
for the local?
The 3-day, as I recall, is something that came in when we expanded the service area So now that we're contracting the service area, it may very well be possible to go back to a 2-day guarantee.
Yeah, Section 9.
Is it in the document?
It
or
is,
that
Section 9
less formal?
contract.
Yeah.
It says residents shall make every effort to schedule rides 72 hours in advance of the desired ride time. So if that needs to be modified, we should address it.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, I'd like to change that to 48.
Can you reach out to Mr. Anderson and his colleagues, Jeff, to see if they'd be amenable to that? But I don't see that there'd be any objection from anybody at this dais. In fact, I think that's been our goal for a number of years. Ms. Tahar?
Yeah, just one footnote to the idea of assessing the need for public transit. This contract will allow us to assess the need for door-to-door service within the city or locally. It doesn't really give us any information about the need for example, the loop that they proposed. Just to be clear. So we're just assessing the need for door-to-door service. Or just seeing how it works.
Correct.
Before I call for the vote, as it relates to that comment, I was able to confirm today that our friends from AAATA will be back to discuss public transit in this area and to report back on some of the questions and concerns that were articulated probably about a month ago on June the 16th, which is our second meeting in June. We'll be having a work meeting with them beginning at 6:30. And as I've said all along, and I'll say it just one more time, I'm very enthusiastic about this motion. I think this is a good change, getting a second bus online that guarantees that one will be within the Saline community. I can't quite guarantee that we'll be within the corporate limits, but very close to that during the entire shift. But I do think it's clear that there's going to be, in the coming years, increased demand for more public transit amenities and services, and that I think the future is with AAATA, which evidently just 2 weeks ago saw a millage proposal that they put on the ballot in Ypsi Township, Ypsi City, and a new one in addition to the pre-existing millage on the ballot in the city of Ann Arbor, and it overwhelmingly passed. I think the worst it did in a precinct in southern Ypsilanti Township was 61%. So I think that is indicative that there is demand and that there is desire to increase the connectivity between those municipalities and sort of the urban core of Washtenaw County. So I look forward to continuing the dialogue with the folks from the ride on June the 16th. If there's nothing further, then we'll proceed to vote. Thank you, Mr. Fordyce. Appreciate your work on this. All those in favor of approving the contract, noting the additional language to the motion, subject to approval by the city attorney, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 14-108, excuse me. This is millage rate for fiscal year 15 General Appropriation Act budget. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 15th, 2014 memo from City Treasurer Bennett regarding the consideration of millage for the fiscal year 15 General Appropriation Act and direct staff to utilize the millage rate for fiscal year 2014-2015 of 16.2800 mils.
Move to acknowledge receipt.
Thank you, Mr. Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Burgoyne. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm assuming you don't have any comments, Ms. Bennett? No? Any questions, comments from council? Mr. Gearba?
Just to clarify that, this is saying that we're not going to change our millage rate, correct?
Correct.
Make sure that we tell the public that,
Yep.
so.
And again, we'll be approving the millage rate at our subsequent meeting, I believe. Is that correct, Ms. Bennett? Thank you. If there's nothing further, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries 5-1. We move on to new business item 14-109. This is the proposed budget for fiscal year 2015, 7/1 of 14 to 6/30 of 15, scheduling of the public hearing. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 15th, 2014 memo from Treasurer Bennett and to approve and adopt or not adopt the resolution as submitted, setting a public hearing on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2014-2015 on Monday, June the 2nd, 2014 at 7:30 p.m. with public notice to be given according to law.
Motion to approve and adopt.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. Any discussion? And Ms. Bennett, I assume again you don't have any comment? Your memo is straightforward? Okay. Then it's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Rhodes to approve and adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 14-110. This is EVIP Category 3. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 15th, 2014 memo from Deputy Treasurer McDonough and to approve or not to approve the unfunded accrued liability plan for reporting of EVIP information to the Department of Treasury, and to authorize or not to authorize the City Manager Campbell, to sign certificate form 5074.
Move to approve and authorize.
Second.
Thank you. I'll let the mover be Councilmember Rhodes and the seconder be Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Ms. Bennett.
Just real quick, one thing that I did need to point out, on the very last page of page 7 of the EVIP, it's not the last page, it's the second to the last page, under the regular actuarial experience study, at the copy that you have passed out to you, we did not know when that was going to be scheduled again, and that is 5 years, so we will populate that field and submit that.
Very good. Are there questions for Ms. Bennett regarding this motion?
Nope, she answered the question I had. Thank
Okay.
you.
Can't beat that. Any subsequent discussion? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar to approve and to authorize. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 14-111, authorizing of the SRF loan. This will be a motion to authorize or not to authorize the city manager to sign the letter requesting the SRF loan for SRF project number 5573, wastewater treatment plant rehabilitation.
Motion to authorize.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. Does staff care to comment at all, Mr. Rubel? Mr. Scull, you don't have to comment. Brian, we appreciate you being here from Tetra Tech.
At a prior meeting, we discussed the merits of combining phases 2 and 3, and so the only means of funding at this point, since phase 1 was using all of our sewer reserve funds, is through the SRF loan, thoroughly explained in work meeting by Mr. Rubel, and so this is the next step to put it in the application. If we do receive the SRF loan, then we can move forward with the planning design bidding to phase 2 and 3.
Very good. Are there any questions for Mr. Rubel? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just real quick, and I forgot to ask this at the last meeting. You know, as we've gone through a lot of this and we've looked at obsolescence of items that are, still structures and things that are still down there, have we made any arrangements to tear out some of those structures that are no longer needed or used in any of this moving forward?
I can let Bob or Brian answer that one. I don't know in particular which structures you mean.
It seemed like there were some items and things that we talked about, the one that held, I don't know, potash or whatever it was, but just clarifying that whatever we've improved and fixed, and then we have stuff that we just seem to abandon, did we account for that in any of our plans moving forward to remove some of that stuff?
Mr. Scull, do you care to comment at all?
That's a really good question. There is a line item for structural repairs, and I believe some of the money in there is slated to remove the fly ash bin, is what you're referring
That
to.
is not potash, fly ash, yeah. So I just wanted to make sure whatever we're doing, we're moving ahead to remove some of that, because I just don't want to be.
We have to. We're running out
abandoned
of
structure.
room.
We're running
Yeah.
out of room, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it's cheaper to do it now than to do it
Absolutely.
in the future, so, okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay. Then it's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Gearbaugh to authorize. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Move on to new business item 14-112. This is contractor pay request number 6. This will be a motion to acknowledge the memo dated May 12th, 2014 from City Superintendent Engineer Rubel, and to approve or not to approve pay request number 6 in the amount of $26,735.30.
I move to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Roth. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. Mr. Rubel, do you care to make a comment at all, sir?
Well, I'll try to answer questions, but I think probably Mr. Rubel or Mr. Skull will probably have a more detailed answer for you, so they probably can fill in the
Okay,
blanks.
very good. Are there any questions for city staff?
Just clarification.
Girba?
Just clarification, it says, although slightly behind, they're bidding to get caught up. Was that all weather related or just performance? Considering our recent incident.
I can't say that it's all weather-related. I think part of it is, the contractor is actually a mechanical contractor. He normally functions as a subcontractor to larger general contractors. And I think he's learning how to be a general contractor and is not quite as punctual at scheduling the other subs and coordinating that. So I fear that that's a little bit of the delay, is just their promptness in doing the management task of the project. The work, for the most part, has been good, other than the incident last week. But so the work is good. Just his coordination leaves a little something to be desired.
Okay.
Additional questions for city staff? Or for Brian from Tetra Tech? No? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Any further discussion? No? Then it's been properly moved by Roth, seconded by Rhodes to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 14-113. This is two motions regarding the Leather Bucket Alley licenses for outdoor seating. The first motion will be a motion to acknowledge the memo dated May the 12th, 2014 from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve a 3-year license for outdoor seating at Mangiamo's.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Mr. Campbell, do you want to go over your memo or comment at all?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You may recall we did something similar last year. We had Brecken Grill and Mangiamo's that had space in the alley. And so some lessons learned. I think overall was successful, but some lessons learned, and had the city attorney's office rewrite and iron out some of the language, and that was based on some meetings we had over the winter with the folks. As you can see, that Brecken Grill decided not to pursue a license. However, Benito's Pizza and Mangiamo have done just that. They've requested that. So we think we've learned from last year and making it still. I mean, still, it's going to be open to the public to traverse from one end to the other. That certainly is important, and that certainly was clarified in the new language. They're going to have required to have little signage on their bollards, if you will, designating their areas and whose areas it is. So we're hopeful that we'll even be even better going forward. So.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Are there any questions for our city manager? Mr. Roth?
I recall last year's contract saying something that the Main Street, or they could schedule to have events, have the rights to have events in the Leather Bucket Alley. I don't see that language in this agreement.
It's in there. And it's actually the city has that ability. Let me see.
4G, top of page 2.
Yeah.
4G, Mr. Roth?
4G?
Yes, sir.
Page 2.
And another question then, as far as why is it a 3-year agreement?
Through those discussions that we had this winter, the businesses felt that they want, if they're making investment, they want a little bit of time as well to potentially gain that investment back as far as tables and chairs and the investment they've made in the backs of their businesses and that type of thing.
Okay, another question is what is the dimensions of the alley? Does it go the full length of all the buildings, or does it end at the end of Mangiamo's?
Mangiamo, corrected. From the lease area to be considered is from where it fronts on South Ann Arbor to the westerly edge of Mangiamo.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Are there additional questions? No? Any discussion? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Burgoyne to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to the subsequent motion, motion B. This will be a motion to acknowledge the memo dated May the 12th from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve a 3-year license for outdoor seating for Benito's Pizza. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. Mr. Campbell, do you care to make any additional comment? Your first analysis probably was sufficient.
Correct, unless there's any questions, I'm happy to, but yeah, again, those were all a group type setting as far as the meetings, and that was a result of some discussions during last year after those leases had already been executed. So Benito's communicated that they were very interested in having seating back there, so.
Very good. Mr. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just clarification, and the property owner's aware of this? I just want to make sure, because that was more the concern last time, that the property owner wasn't aware. I know this is the lease holder.
It's with the business. I have not, from last year, as I mentioned, lessons learned, that property owner was very insistent that she wanted her tenant to have space in the alley.
Okay.
But to answer, I did not communicate this new language with her.
So you're doing this on behalf of the tenant.
Correct. On behalf of the business, just like we did last year with.
Appreciate it if this could be forwarded to, after it's
Oh, sure,
forwarded to,
certainly.
so that they
Certainly.
understand what it is.
We can certainly do
we
that.
Accommodated her tenant.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Burgoyne?
Just a comment that I noticed that the length involved here was 25 feet. And then I do agree with the idea that if private businesses make an investment in tables, chairs, cleanup, and so forth, that we should provide more than a 1-year contract.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Are there any additional comments? No, that's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Gearbaugh to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 14-114. This is outdoor cafe tables at Detroit Dog Company, 103 North Ann Arbor Street. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the application from Detroit Dog Co. to use the public right-of-way for outdoor cafe tables on North Ann Arbor Street, and to acknowledge the receipt of the May 14th memo from City Clerk Royal, the May 6, 2014 memo from Police Chief Rennick, the May 12, 2014 memo from Building Inspector Taylor, and to approve or not to approve the temporary license for use of North Ann Arbor Street public street right-of-way for outdoor cafe tables, benches, stools, and planters.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Does staff care to comment at all? No? Okay, any questions for staff? Mr. Rhodes?
I have a question on the drawing that's been submitted. It appears to me that there's a table shown in the same location as a tree has been identified, and I'm not sure how that's going to work.
It is, it goes around the tree.
So the people will be sitting on the grate that's
It's
around
not,
the tree?
it's not sitting, it's a standing table. From what I understood, from what she told me, is it's a place just, if you want to stand and talk to somebody, you can sit down and pop while you're eating and talk.
Okay.
But there's no chairs or benches going at that table.
Just want to make sure we don't do anything to damage that tree.
No, that's, yeah, she's.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Is there additional questions?
Could you clarify? You said there won't be a bench,
Not around the tree.
but there are benches on here, just at these two tables.
For those two long tables, but not for the small tree area.
And all of this is on the step-down section, so this will
That
be
is
all
correct.
open. Got it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Ms. Tahar?
Yes, I can't remember from looking at the license, is there a time period specified for this?
It's a one-year application. Every year they have to reapply for this.
I think she was speaking more to the duration. From
Yeah.
what period, from what time to what time?
No, yeah,
Is that
actually,
what you-
so it has to be renewed every year.
Yes.
All right, okay, thank you.
And if I may, you may recall, Mr. Har, that a few years ago, council changed. It used to be every year they would come, but as long as they don't, from year to year, as long as when they apply, that it's not a significant change in the layout, and/or there has not been any complaints, then it would be an administrative approval by the clerk's office.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Roth?
I want a little bit of clarification on that. They're paying a $50 fee for this. Will they be paying a $50 fee every year, or is it free after the first year?
It's 25 after the first year.
Okay, thank you.
If I might, I was thinking, and unfortunately, Gary, I thought we had changed that in the fee book, because I thought it was 150 application for the first time, and then 100 renewal, I thought.
Can we get clarification on that?
Certainly, yes.
You can even put it in your weekly communication.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Burgoyne?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I do like the idea of having outside seating because it gives a choice to people. It also increases the activity level that kind of you view as you come through the area, and I think that's a positive.
Yep, absolutely. Is there anything further? No? Then it's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Tahar to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Subsequent motion is motion number 14-115. This is outdoor cafe tables at Benito's Pizza, 100 South Ann Arbor Street. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the application from Benito's Pizza for the use of public right-of-way for outdoor cafe tables on South Ann Arbor Street, and to acknowledge receipt of the May 14th, 2014 memo from City Clerk Royal, the May 6, 2014 email from Police Chief Rennick, and the May 12, 2014 memo from Building Inspector Taylor, and to approve or not to approve the temporary license for use of South Ann Arbor Street public right-of-way for outdoor cafe tables.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded again by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Staff care to make any comment? No? Pretty self-explanatory. Mr. Gearbaugh, did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, has anybody actually gone up and measured that? I'm looking at this picture, and that looks pretty tight between the light pole and the planter, because it only looks like one sidewalk width, and aren't those 4-foot sidewalks? Where it says 5 to 6 feet between tables? I just want to make sure we don't run into a problem that we've had before, because that curb cut seems to come in there, I thought.
Last year when this first came up, City Manager Campbell and myself went out and measured it. There's adequate space.
Okay.
And Mr. Taylor did go up and measure. He measured both of them.
Okay.
If you look at from his memo, 10 feet shown on his drawing. Again, so you have 4 or 5 foot to put those tables and chairs in to maintain that 5-foot walkway.
Okay. I just didn't remember what was there last year.
There weren't any last year in front for them.
I didn't think there was. Okay.
Additional comments or questions? No? Okay. It's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. The last motion of the evening is an addendum, and it's new business item C-14-116. This will be a motion, this is the 2006 Vector repairs. This is a motion to acknowledge the memo dated May the 19th from DPW Director Fordyce, and to authorize or not authorize the purchase of parts, labor, and supplies from Jack Donnie Companies of Northville in the estimated amount of $16,026.78 for repairs to the 2006 Vector.
Move to authorize.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Gearbaugh. Mr. Fordyce, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. We recently started having some trouble with our Vector truck. The main chamber on it has rusted, and some of the attachments to that chamber have also rusted, creating some perforations which make it impossible for us to create a vacuum in there. And the vac in Vector is for vacuum. So that's a very important part of how the machine operates. Without that function, we cannot clean catch basins. We cannot do what we call hydro excavating. It's a technique we use a spray hose and then the Vector to suck up the dirt when we're excavating in around utilities and dangerous places, or where we want to make a very controlled and confined excavation. We use that to evacuate water from excavations when we're doing water main repairs. And then the other function of the Vector, which is still working, but is sewer jetting. But that function is also limited by the lack of the vacuum section, because if we move a blockage out of a sanitary sewer, we like to be able to then remove that from the downstream manhole so that it doesn't just continue down and block another storm or another sewer further down the line. So a very important piece of equipment in our fleet, and needs this fairly extensive repair. We made some efforts in-house to patch. We have some very talented welders on staff, but there's just too much. It needs to be, these parts need to be replaced. So received this estimate from Jack. It's Doheny, not Doney.
He said Doheny.
Doheny. Yeah.
It's an A, I don't know. Yeah.
We have it spelled right, that's the important thing.
Yeah. And that's the vendor that we purchased the equipment from. We've done most of the maintenance on it in-house, but they've provided services and parts through the years. And most importantly, when the vehicle was nearing the end of its warranty period, they alerted us to a common problem that has happened in a number of these that we had not experienced yet, but upon closer inspection, it was beginning, and then we were able to get a significant repair under warranty with their assistance there. So there is money within the sewer collection and water distribution budgets to cover this. They're not in the right lines right now, so there'd be an amendment to move them to those lines, but no increase in the budget.
Very good. And I appreciate council accommodating us in bringing this item onto the agenda at the last minute. Thank you very much. Are there questions for our DPW Director or City staff? No? Okay. Any discussion? No? Well, that was easy enough. Then it's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Gearbaugh to authorize. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to the discussion portion of our agenda this evening. First up is commission, committee, or task force reports. No? Okay. Well, how about that? How about reports and other announcements? Just a reminder about the Memorial Day Parade on Monday. As always, we as a city council will be marching for those who are interested, and I strongly encourage you to attend. And of course, the parade will be followed by a ceremony at Oakwood Cemetery, and then I believe by an additional ceremony and lunch at our American Legion post. And I believe the Memorial Day Parade steps off at 10 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Okay. And then, as usual, we need somebody to take the lead on getting that banner all set up, and then, of course, return to the police department following the parade. Do I have any takers on that?
Oh, I can.
You'll do that? Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh.
Where do we meet?
We'll meet right out here on Harris Street, in front of City Hall. So hope to see you Memorial Day, a little before 10. And I actually think the firefighters will have a pancake breakfast, so if you want to come a little bit early, I know they would welcome and appreciate seeing you there. Okay? Reports or other announcements, Mr. Burgoyne?
Yes, you suggested we talk about Willow Run.
Oh, yes, please.
At this point.
Yep.
Well, my questions are, why isn't there already a memorial there? I know that the Guinness Book of Records, there's an attempt to get the greatest number of Rosie the Riveters together. There are Willow Run Airport memorials. How are those memorials different from this one? Or how's this one different from what's happened before? Why is the state being requested to fund it? Wasn't there enough of a groundswell to just fund it locally? I just don't know that much about it.
Okay. Well, maybe one of the gentlemen who I know is behind this movement, would you mind coming forward and maybe you could address some of Mr. Burgoyne's questions?
Timothy King, 1573 Molly Street, Ypsilanti, Michigan. I am current precinct delegate in Ypsilanti Township, Republican Party. The question on that, they do have a state, they're in the process of tearing that down. Racer is tearing that down, who owns the property. There is a state marker that was on the plant. That has been taken. We do not know who has that. We don't know if it's going to be melted down. The marker told of the history of the plant from its beginnings to when General Motors had it, and in between with Kaiser Fraser. There is no other memorial. There is no memorial there whatsoever.
So nobody knows where that placard or whatever that is?
That plaque would probably, the Yankee Air Force, I was told by the Yankee Air Force Museum, Tony Pequino, who is the artifacts manager this past week, that the museum officials went in there, Racer had them go in there and take whatever, or ask to get whatever you want that would to save, as far as historical things, like the door there where the machine guns were made for Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. Other things that of historical significance. But as far as that goes, there is no state memorial. That is why we've kicked this thing off, and we're trying to get support statewide. And just today, the United States House of Representatives, every member from Michigan, and Senator Levin and Senator Stabenow, I've contacted them regarding signing the proclamation. And just yesterday, the state chair of the Democratic Party, Lon Johnson, and the state chair of the Republican Party, Bobby Shostak. So we're trying to get them on board with this also. But there is no memorial as of yet, or there never has been over there.
Please. Another question. I've heard, but because it didn't concern Saline, I didn't pay that much attention to it, but I have heard that part of Willow Run, there's an attempt to save a portion, and $8.2 million has been raised. There needs to be maybe 10% more or something, so they're going to be able to forestall the tearing down of something, but I don't, can you explain that?
That has already been accomplished.
Oh. What is
The $8 million was raised.
Yeah.
A private donor, I'm thinking Jack Roush, I'm not sure. Who don't quote me on that, though. But they did save that portion of the hangar at the end of the bomber plant where the B-24s would come out, where they came out, and that was saved. The Yankee Air Force Museum still needs donations, and they're seeking donations and seeking to raise money through air shows and things like that, because there is another $8 million worth of renovations just to get that museum moved from the Beck Road side of Willow Run Airport. They intend, where they are at right now, they intend on moving into the new the hangar on the Ypsilanti Township side and selling the current home of the museum. So yes, there is still money to be raised, but that's for renovation. And then there's an issue with pollution. And that's always going to be a big issue.
Do you have additional questions, Mr.
Yes. If the museum, if some things are being saved and the museum is bringing itself forward into prominence in the hangar area where those bombers were coming out, are they going to have memorials or so forth, or how is this different from what they're doing? It's hard for me to get my mind to get everything unified.
Well, I cannot answer for the Yankee Air Force Museum personally on this issue. I know the original plan is to have a memorial. We would like to have it, and there are people that are on staff at the museum that have signed on to this that would like to have a memorial by Hangar 1. And
Is Hangar 1 where the museum is?
Hangar 1
moving
is,
to?
is what has been saved.
Okay.
And of the original bomber plant. If by any chance there will be maybe issues with pollution and things like that, because after the war there was sludge and all kinds of oil and coolant and tooling and everything thrown into the swamp between the bomber plant and the Will Run Assembly, and there's a lot of pollution over there. So if it's not able to have a memorial right next to the hangar, the closest place would be wherever Brenda Stumbo in Ypsilanti Township. Brenda Stumbo has told me personally that the Ypsilanti Township would give land. The next choice would probably be the old village of Willow Run. But that they're still in the planning stages with the, we have a steering committee that will be set up, 2 members from the Ypsilanti Township Board, 2 members from the Willow Run Yankee Air Force Museum, and 2 members from the Willow Run Tea Party Caucus. And the money, as far as if we procure funds for this, we would be asking the governor for $2 million. And that would be from the state. And also there would be private donations that I have sent letters out to Bill Ford Jr. and the Ford Motor Company, Metaldyne Corporation, Marathon Oil Company, Key Bank, Flagstar Bank, and other corporations. There's a whole list of Michigan Fortune 500 corporations that I plan on going down the list and trying to get corporate donors and private donors from the public also. And so it's that part is still in the planning stage.
Okay, very good. Good, Mr. Burgoyne? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And again, this will come back in a different form at our next meeting on June the 2nd. Thank you. Any other reports or announcements? Do you want to report real quick on the coyote stuff?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of you I know have either seen them yourselves or had residents call you and ask about the coyotes that people see around town, and we as staff working through the police department and MDNR to discuss that as an issue. And so we did, as I put in my communique, I had provided an article from a specialist in your mailboxes this last week. So, you know, and also, as I said in my communique, you know, some communities bring in specialists to talk about them, and again, you're, as a country boy from the northwestern Michigan, I'm still pretty solid on my thoughts on coyotes, but it was a very informative article, and I learned some more information. So, just want to let you know, I mean, yes, we're going to see them, and they're a very resilient animal, and I mean, you see them in very large cities as well. My understanding is from the information that we have gathered, there's something like 2,000 coyotes in Chicago. So I mean, they're always there, and but they, as far as some of the concerns of small pets and that type of thing, what the specialists will tell you is that that's very the amount when they actually, not to get too technical or too graphic, when they examine the feces in these studies, it's extremely. I mean, it's a single-digit % of small pets and that type of thing. So Again, so we just wanted to let, council know, and certainly that we are, monitoring it. They are here certainly as you see, development continues, their habitats get smaller and their ranges can be 100 miles. But also what the studies show is that if you try to eliminate them, they actually can produce faster, or I should say reproduce faster. So there is certainly there is sufficient, obviously that's why they're here, there's sufficient game for them to support them. We have our deer and what I would call varmint population in a rural setting, and so, but I guess happy to do our best to respond to any questions or comments.
Any questions from City Council? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just quick, when should we become concerned about him? If it's showing up at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon in town? Because yesterday I was in my front lawn and the little bugger just walked right by into the private lot, about 50 feet away from me. Not fearful, just looked at me. I'm more concerned about potentially something like that becoming that type of animal, because a lot of us as reporters seen the same one, that it become too familiar with humans and actually a child or somebody's bit.
Sure.
So at that point in time, what do we do to capture it and get it out of town?
Well, again, the studies have shown. I mean, you first of all, the folks that the varmint, the critter controls, if you will, the different companies that we've contacted have declined. They're not interested in doing any of that with coyotes. At this point in time, we don't have any takers on that. The biggest thing is that don't provide food sources, whether it be dog food that's left out on the deck, for instance, or those types of things where they can come in when people aren't around. Certainly, I mean, there's always the exception. I mean, if they're sick. I mean, if anybody's seen a rabid raccoon, for instance, or a squirrel, I'm certainly not trying to minimize. Certainly that is a concern, but statistically speaking, they stay away from humans, and I mean, again, if they're sick or if they again, if there is a food source that they can continue to come to, they probably will.
Additional questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Any other reports or announcements? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Something for discussion. Mrs. has mentioned it, but I've been experiencing uptown too, how to deal with cigarette butts and some of that stuff. It's just gotten ridiculous, and I don't know if we need to look into putting some type of new repositories for cigarette butts and stuff like that, or look at banning smoking in public places, similar to what Ann Arbor's done. It's mainly, I'm tired of cleaning it up. It's like 4 or 5 packs every other day of cigarette butts laying around, so at this point, I think that's something we need to look at, keeping our downtown clean.
Absolutely, and actually, I believe there's a downtown property and business owner meeting tomorrow, I believe. I'll be happy to bring that up.
Thank you.
Any other reports or announcements? Okay, we move on to the Mayor's Exchange. Just a reminder that is this Thursday, the 22nd, I believe, with the City of Whitehall. I believe there are 7 or 8 people from the City of Whitehall coming, including their mayor, a number of council members, their city manager, and police chief. The clerk should have emailed you an itinerary, and I confirmed details today. We're going to have lunch at Mangiamo, so I think it's going to be a really nice afternoon, and if your schedules permit, I hope that you'll be able to join us. And if you don't have that itinerary, please connect with the clerk after the meeting this evening, and she can provide you either a hard copy or an electronic one. Okay? If there's nothing else on the Mayor's Exchange, then we'll move on to the wastewater treatment incident. And passed out earlier this evening is a memorandum signed by Bob Skull. It's not dated, but the memo line states sludge spill that occurred on Tuesday, May 13th, 2014. Does everyone have a copy of that? Mr. Roth, did you receive a copy of that down there? Yeah. Mr. Burgoyne?
Yeah, I think so.
There you go. Use that copy, Ms. Tahar. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
So Mr. Skull is here to address any questions, concerns you may have. I'll just make a few comments. And Mr. Scull, I appreciate in the fourth paragraph of your letter, moving forward, I feel we should develop a policy regarding the isolation, startups, and shutdowns of all equipment. That was one of my concerns, what sort of policy deficiencies exist that could contribute to these types of incidents in the future. Also noting that over the next several years, we're going to have a number of projects, a number of contractors out there, and this is obviously something we want to avoid. It's just not acceptable. The other thing that I think it would be appropriate for you to state as part of the public record, because I don't know why I'm laughing, but I've had to say this umpteen times over the past week, questioned by a number of citizens. Our water is safe to drink.
Correct.
Okay, all right. That's just a question, a concern I've heard frequently.
We draw our water from aquifers,
Right.
not from the river.
Right, okay. Well, I appreciate your work on this to rectify the situation. Additionally, I appreciate the work of Tetra Tech to assist. And at this point, I'd open it up to any questions that council members may have. Mr. Burgoyne.
Well, in terms of all of the rain that we've had and the swelling up of the river, and as the rainwater pulls in brown water, there's a lot of biological demand in that water and in that extra flow of water. So isn't this very small?
It is, but it's very hard to quantify that without having the levels of pollutants in the river before and the level afterwards, and then 3 miles on the river. I doubt.
Right, but just eyeballing,
yeah,
it's like these guys in, was it Seattle, where one individual urinated along the side of a reservoir of water, but then everybody pointed out there are bats and raccoons and everything else out there all the time, but they spent all the money to drain the entire reservoir because they caught one person on camera, and it wasn't even directly into the reservoir, it was on the dirt near it. I mean, sometimes things get overblown. The follow-up question is DEQ or somebody, is the regulating agency going to look at this, and can there possibly be a fine, and then would the contractor be liable for that fine, not us?
We're still waiting to hear from the MDQ regards to a fine, and the contractor will definitely be held responsible for that, as well as the overtime amount. Today I had an independent electrician come in to verify that nothing was damaged from the flood. So I'm waiting to get the bill from them, and they will also be applied to the contractor.
Anything further, Mr. Burgoyne?
No.
Then we'll jump down to Mr. Gearbaum, and then I'll let you
Just
comment.
real
Yeah.
quick, what happened and what are we doing to prevent it from happening?
Well, what happened was the contractor was performing some work on the digester, and he failed to isolate the section of piping he was removing. He was supposed to verify the valve positions with plant personnel, and he didn't do that. You know, I'm sure he thought it was safe, but unfortunately, it wasn't safe, and we had a sudden discharge of 146,000 gallons of sludge within about an hour.
So it came right out of a pipe, it didn't overflow
Right out of
something?
the pipe, straight up to the ceiling. It was not. It was inside. A lot of the spill was contained inside. A lot of the spill made it between the buildings, which are all paved. So it was easily contained, but it will have an effect on the plant this month, and it will have effect on our discharge permit.
Okay. No, that helps understand where it happened and everything, just so it wasn't that it just went right straight into the sewer out of ours, so.
Well, I think in the future that when we do look at not expanding, but improving the plant further, we should have a policy that they simply work when personnel are there. It happened at a great time, but if it would have happened later in the day, it could have been far worse. So we should put in place that they work when we're there, and if they need us to stay over, then they pay us to stay over.
Those are good changes, Mr. Scull.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, did you care to comment, Phil?
Well, I was just going to add that a letter to that effect, to Mr. Burgoyne's question, was sent out to putting the contractor on notice.
Mr. Rhodes?
What happened to the employee who was there when that pipe discharged?
He got covered, but he's fine. There was no injuries.
Okay.
We all got covered, actually. It was a mess.
Anything else?
Real quick, will OSHA be involved in any of this?
I don't know. I hope not.
Well, I just want to make sure we've covered that.
There was no injuries reported because nobody was hurt.
Okay, but no potential individuals in a environment that was dangerous or something?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing further, Mr. Scull, thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your work to rectify this. It's appreciated very much. If there's nothing further, then we move on to the last two discussion items, which are holdovers from our work meeting. The first one is employee contracts, and I believe that was an item that was added by Mr. Burgoyne, so I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Burgoyne.
All right, well, the way that the current contract clause 4 in the employee contract works is that when an employee is terminated these are for non-union employees, they get 6 months severance, but they do not get unemployment. And there was some discussion from the attorney on this, and the discussion was that the unemployment costs may be up to $7,500. The severance may be more in the area of $40,000. And my thought is that, and also that this is unusual, my thought is that it would be better to do something that's more usual. And that's why I brought it up. For example, if instead of 6 months severance, they were without unemployment, there would be 2 months severance with unemployment available. The unemployment would not necessarily be 6 months, so it might not be the $7,500 cost to the city. If an employee got a job 2 months in or 3 months in, then if they got a job, they wouldn't draw the unemployment full time. And the other aspect of that is that unemployment system as a system itself works with Michigan Works. And I think rather than giving somebody a lump sum and have them on their own and actually sometimes in contention with the city, it would be better to be supportive during that time and have the former employee work through the unemployment system in Michigan Works and do it in a more collaborative way. And that would reduce the potential for legal costs to, if there is in order to ensure that you don't pay the unemployment, you actually pay legal costs, which is a cost. And I just think it's better to allow the unemployment because it's supposed to be a safety net. And sometimes if you give somebody an amount of money, they go through it pretty quickly and then they don't have the safety net for the 6 months. And I just think it'd be better for us to be more usual rather than to have an unusual system. So I'm bringing it up, and I just wanted to hear from the other members on the council.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Does any other member have an opinion they'd like to express at this time? Mr. Gearbaugh?
I mean, I don't, if it's something that would be more beneficial for us in terms of, cost and effectiveness, I don't have a problem revising something. I just don't know what standard among other communities and such for this type of approach. But I know we've had ours forever, and it never hurts to look at something, but I don't know what the approach is and if it costs us less, but I do know that putting people onto unemployment and such could cost us more and cost us in our rates and things, so.
Yeah, I would share the concerns of Mr. Gearbaugh. I would venture to guess that you could have more liability and more costs by putting someone on unemployment. And Mr. Burgoyne may be correct that what our approach has been historically is unusual, that may be the case. I simply don't have the data to justify that at this point, but I would-
Actually, the attorney provided you information. The attorney said that, pardon me?
Go ahead, Mr. Glenn.
The attorney said that this is unusual. That was one part that the attorney provided. Another part that the attorney provided was that it may cost in the area of $40,000, and that the expected unemployment amount would be more in the area of $7,500. In terms of what other communities do, most communities do not do this length of time. I know that from experience, and the attorney also said that this was unusual, and most communities do not do that. So the attorney also said that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would agree. This topic came up maybe 4 years ago, and 4 or 5 years ago. I would concur that we do it a little uniquely when all non-union have individual employment agreements and with severance, 6-month severance packages. As Mr. Burgoyne alluded, Steve Gerard, our city labor attorney, pointed out that it's more typical or a practice for the top 1 or 2 appointed officials to have a severance. Typically, for what I'm familiar with is typically it's city manager, but sometimes it also includes the police chief, and I think the reason for that is because of the potential volatility in those positions. So that's what I would say is the norm. And to Mr. Burgoyne's other point, we have done a lump sum payment. We've also done the kind of pay as you go, if you will. So if you have whatever duration of your severance, you would get paid at the same frequency as you were getting paid when you were working. So you wouldn't get that lump sum and have to worry about squandering it, for lack of a better term. So so if you had a 6-month or 2-month or 4-month or whatever, you would continue to get paid the same time that active employees were getting paid.
So we've heard from Mr. Burgoyne, Mr. Gearbaugh. It sounds like you'd be amenable to a change if it was sort of proven that it would potentially render a cost
I
savings.
mean, my goal is to see more improvements in cost containment overall for everyone.
Sure.
I know that we don't have this incident. Luckily, we've been fortunate to not have a significant lot of turnover where we had to let people go. So wherever we get our bang for our biggest buck, that's where I'm looking.
And I would certainly, if it genuinely saves dollars, Mr. Burgoyne, I would be happy to look at it. I don't want to disagree with you because you may be right that what we do is unusual. I would just like an opportunity to engage a little bit more with a professional and have an opportunity to ask questions. But your point is very well taken. Let me just see how everyone else feels. Mr. Roth, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I agree, cost containment as much as possible.
Okay. Mr. Rhodes?
I don't feel like I've got enough information about it to take a position at this point.
Okay. Ms. Tahar?
I'd like to hear from Mr. Gerard if he perceives a way of being more cost effective.
Can we reach out to our Labor Council for some analysis? Thank you. Mr. Burgoyne?
The Labor Council also said that there's a way to strengthen the language of the contract to make it clear that people would not get unemployment. It is, obviously, he's able to do that, to strengthen the language, to avoid future legal challenges in the future so that we wouldn't have to pay a lawyer to defend us if it were, stronger. But on the other hand, I'm just thinking that if there isn't an additional cost and we can do something that's more supportive to the employee, why not? Especially if there's a little bit of a savings.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if everybody received the attorney's letter, or if I'm the only one who received it.
I got a copy.
Yeah.
Everybody
Oh,
received
you
it.
did?
Everybody
Okay.
received it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember it. I just,
Okay, you just look, a lot of the information is in there.
Yeah. Well, we'll engage the city's labor council and see if we can get maybe additional analysis or maybe an opportunity for him to come and discuss this with us.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Our last item is 2 budget requests that have been made by Councilmember Rhodes. We printed out a copy of his requests at our last meeting a week ago, but I see that the city clerk has provided you an additional supplemental this evening. So there are 2 requests, one related to the Environmental Commission and one related to Saline Leadership. Mr. Rhodes, do you want to maybe speak about these briefly?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Marl. I asked Clerk Royal to reprint the applicable portions of my previous email for this evening so that everybody would have that in front of them. The first item has to do with the Environmental Commission, and these were items that we did not have time to get to in our work session. The River Raisin Watershed Council membership dues, which were $825 this last year, and I believe are going to stay the same amount for next year, have been paid out of what I believe is the administrative area, their membership line item, dues item. And I would just request that those dollars be moved from administration into environmental commissions line item for dues and membership, since the Environmental Commission is a designated representative to the River Raisin Watershed Council. That seems to make sense to me. And then...
Can I, real quick, Mr. Rhodes? Because I
yes,
think
certainly.
we can develop consensus on that one pretty quickly. Would there be any objections to making that change? That seems pretty straightforward to me.
Put it in his line item for the environmental, I think that's fine.
Yep, okay. So we'll proceed. Thank you. That was easy enough.
Yeah, that's quick. And then I had requested that with that move, the Environmental Commission's budget be $3,000 in total, including the 825. So if we can agree with that, that's fine. The second item is the Saline Leadership Institute, and that's a program that was started, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That was started 15 years ago, and it was a joint venture between the city and the schools and the library. And the schools have continued to provide funding through community education for that program, and the library provides support through their hours of keeping the program going and materials that they provide. And so I talked with city manager about the possibility of the city providing some support. And if we were to do that, it would most likely need to be in the form of a contract with Coalition for Quality Community, which is the mothership of Saline Leadership Institute, to provide training, development for future leaders and volunteers within the community. And the value of that service, I would put at $1,000 per year. And I think that SLI has done a great job of developing leadership traits and volunteers within our community. And in fact, I believe many of the folks here at the dais have been through that, and some of the folks out there in the audience. So I would like to request support from council for the city to enter into that contract with CQC at $1,000 a year, or some other method that the city manager feels is appropriate.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mickey Joe can join in the discussion too. So as we propose the budget with a little over $6,300 to the good in excess of expenditure, revenue over expenditures for fiscal year 15. So that would, as I add, that'd be 600 additional for Environmental Commission, correct?
Well, I'm not sure the exact amount of.
It's 2,400 is what is currently in the proposed budget for Environmental Commission.
And then the 825 just moves over, so that's no increase.
Well, okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you wanted it to be 3,000 in addition to the 825.
No.
Okay, okay, perfect. So, all right, so then it'd be $1,000 difference. We have now, maybe recall from the work session, which I know Mr. Rhodes was not able to be here, we are reserving the money for the police cruiser, because you may recall we didn't propose one because we were attempting to get one purchased still in this fiscal year, which we're not able to, especially with the four-wheel drive component. Those aren't available until October. So we're going to reserve it for that. So we're going to reserve fiscal year 2014 dollars for 2015. So those dollars are coming out of this current budget. However, it will reflect, just so you all know, I mean, it will reflect more expenditures over revenue. I mean, certainly things we might be able to, as the year goes on, at the end of the year, we could be back where we're at as we're proposed, but just to make you aware of that. So there is, so again, as far as an amount, you know, I try to be frugal, so, you know, I don't know if you know, 500, 1,000, well, I mean, whatever, council, the consensus of council would be.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
I believe council has a, what, $2,100 budget for community-supported events or something like that. Potentially, we could take money out of that to use it for this. I don't think we've been using it every year.
No, we haven't.
Speaking of the community promotions,
Yep.
it's about $3,000, right?
Yep. It's already there. You could use whatever, if Mr. would like $1,000. What I'd like to know, though, is that we potentially out of that 1,000, that we probably get something out of it, that we send one of our individuals from staff, however we want to do it, or is this in addition to someone that participates?
It's in addition, the schools provide support, plus they send people at full paid tuition. And
But that is
one of our goals within the community is to increase our volunteerism, and this is a way to do it, in my opinion.
Since we're looking for consensus, I don't necessarily have a problem with a $1,000 amount. I would probably prefer something more in the 500 range, but if we're going to be pulling $1,000 out of the city council line item related to community promotions, I don't have a problem with the $1,000 amount. That's fine with me. Mr. Har?
Do we know a dollar amount for community education's contribution?
This next year will be $750. It has been as much as $2,000.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Burgoyne?
Well, this whole movement of the CARES millage, the school recreation millage, had a lot of components to it, and this education component was part of it. And I'm not, some things don't need to last forever, and I'm not sure how frequently the Leadership Institute should be done, like done every year or done periodically or whatever. And I also don't see that, I see a difference between how the school may benefit from something, and the school is in education and that type of thing. And the view from the community, I see this as an extra expense. And just because we do have funding, we do have available funds, what we have done in the past is we have had sponsored individuals to go through the program. So if that's done, that's fine, you know, as a training. But I don't see taking up additional costs like this and starting new contract costs. I'm not in favor of a new initiative like this.
Okay. So I think that was Mr. Gearbaugh, you'd be in favor of taking $1,000 out of the city council promotions line item, is that correct?
Approximately, I mean, up to, if it's less, that's fine too.
Would you be more amenable to another dollar amount?
It's whatever seems appropriate compared to the other entities, but also I'd like to know actually how much city participation we've had in the last few years too.
Well, it didn't exist last year, but they took a year hiatus, rather.
Right, I knew that.
You care to comment at all?
Sure, I think it's been at least two years at least that we haven't sent folks, partly budgetary, but partly because most everybody in leadership or second tier level had gone.
I should say more than city residents, not just city staff.
Oh, okay.
Because the idea is that we're trying to build our volunteers to take over our positions at some point in time. So that's the encouragement, and if we contribute this kind of money, I'd like to make sure that we're seeing a significant component of our own citizens are participating in it.
Yeah, I think the majority of the folks who attend are residents of the.
Okay, so if that's what's true, then I don't see a problem with supporting this.
Mr. Roth, do you have an opinion, sir?
No opinion.
No opinion?
No opinion.
Okay. Ms. Tahar?
I would be in favor of some level of support this year. I think it's particularly important since they've taken a year of hiatus to reorganize and rethink, which is always a good thing to do. So I think that supporting this year and seeing how it goes would be a good thing.
Okay. I'll make it 4 so we have consensus to move forward. I'll support taking $1,000 out of the city council promotions line item in our budget, which I believe Mickey Joe is slated for $3,000.
If I may, for clarification, that when you say this year, you're referring to fiscal year 15?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
I know what you were, I just want to make sure I heard.
Yes.
Just want to make sure we're in the
Sorry.
right direction. That's all
But
right.
I would agree to a certain extent with Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. I'd like to reassess this next year, and I would like to get to a point where maybe it was more a $500 contribution, especially when we send somebody who's either directly or indirectly affiliated with our organization to Saline leadership. But for the purpose of developing consensus, it looks like we've got 4 people to move forward with $1,000 from that particular line item in the budget.
Thank you all.
So question I have, would council feel comfortable making a motion to authorize a dollar amount with a city attorney-approved agreement to provide future leaders for the community? Because again, in order to do something, we would need to have, because we need to get something in return.
I'll make a motion to do, if you need a motion, whatever, to consider that, because I think, yeah, we do need to show what kind of consideration and stuff we're getting for it.
So you can restate that?
Yeah.
So moved by Gearba.
And I'll second it.
One, city council to designate a specific amount,
So $1,000.
right, to come out of the promotional, community promotions line item of the city council.
To support Saline leadership.
Support Saline Leadership
Institute?
thank you, SLI.
Subject to.
I'm trying to think. Subject to
An official
an
agreement?
official agreement drafted by the city attorney.
I'll
You
second that.
You're clear on what your motion is, Mr. Gearba?
Yep,
Okay.
that sounds clear to me.
Okay, Mr. Roth, you're comfortable with that?
Yes, I'll second
Okay.
that.
All right, I don't think we need discussion because I think we've had that. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, the motion carries. Okay.
I do have a question, though.
Please.
How will we know what the city is getting out of it? I mean, these forums are good for thinking about community issues. They're good for thinking about how to process things, how to think about things. And they're good for meeting each other, for community people to meet each other. But how does that translate to something? I mean, what do we get?
Well, that's obviously a difficult question to quantify, but I mean, I would defer a little bit to Councilmember Rhodes, who's been on the leadership team and active in Saline leadership for a number of years. Perhaps when this new class gets going and as the process develops, you can report back on how things are going, and if there are people from one of our boards or commissions or from city staff who are participating.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that, and I would like to encourage our current commissioners to consider applying.
Yeah, and we will, if I may, Mayor.
Yes.
We will, city attorney's office will work with CQC to, obviously, to come to agreeable language. I mean, just one thought is that potentially maybe somehow keeping track of, okay, these folks went through and so now they're volunteering. I don't know, we can talk about that, but that's something how to, somehow, right, it is difficult to quantify, but certainly, Mr. Burgoyne's right. I mean, we need to know, and Mr. Gearback mentioned that as well, we need to get something in return, and we obviously, it may be a little difficult to grasp, but we need to, I mean, I think we all understand what, you know, the importance of it, but.
We could survey the graduates couple of 3 months after the graduation to see if they have in fact participated more within the community than they did before, and perhaps in what organization, what way.
Sure.
And maybe that's a topic for a future team meeting of the leadership, Saline Leadership Institute and CQC, is how best to gauge that and report back to the city. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you.
Okay, that exhausts the discussion portion of the agenda this evening. So if there's nothing further, we'll move on to citizen comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Timothy King, 1573 Molly Street, Ypsilanti Township. There was something that sparked my interest tonight on a different subject, Mr. Mayor. I am a bass fisherman, and I have family in Saline and in Manchester. Back in 2001, 2002, I headed up an effort with my grandfather to obtain permits from the Department of Natural Resources to stock the River Raisin. We ended up doing that with donation jars throughout Bridgewater, the village of Bridgewater and Manchester. And a lot of my family lives right on the river over in Manchester. And they fish. And one of the things, and we did end up through donations through citizens in Saline and Bridgewater and Manchester, we were able to hire Jim Carricher of Spring Valley Trout Farm in Dexter, and he put 5,000 channel cat into the River Raisin. We had the Manchester Men's Club donate toward the cause, and they put largemouth bass. The Saline River is an important issue for me and the River Raisin because the Saline River is a tributary on the side of the River Raisin. One thing I would ask you, Mr. Mayor, to every 5 years or so, you would want to get a hold of Saline Township and keep an eye on Austin Road and the farms. Saline River is a great area for smallmouth bass as well as the River Raisin. There's farms on Austin Road that between here and what's the town? Bridgewater. Between here and Bridgewater, that we sports fishermen go seine net fishing, and in the past we have done this to catch minnows, large crappie minnows, bass minnows, pike minnows in the creeks that run right into the Saline River. And we end up seeing pollution and cow manure like crazy and dead fish floating everywhere. So I would ask that please keep an eye on that with Saline Township because that is an area of concern as a sports fisherman myself. And I just wanted to say that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Are there additional citizen comments?
Hi, my name is Deva Jabal Baba. I live on 77 Nichols Drive. I'm a member of the Michigan Archaeology Society, specifically the Huron Valley chapter. And last fall, our chapter submitted an application to work on the Saline Salt Springs. And we have not heard back as to the status of our application. We're interested in just doing a preliminary survey, and if we find anything, we potentially like to excavate or do some test pits. And so we're curious to know what's going on with Saline Salt Springs. Will you guys be developing it very soon? And what's going on with our application? We know that there was $1 million insurance that was required from us, but the thing is that we're a small nonprofit and we would not be able to pay for that $1 million insurance coverage for the volunteers that will be working. But in exchange, we'll be doing all this work for free, and we do think that there are there's a lot of potential for historical finds there. So.
Appreciate it. Maybe after the meeting, I can connect you with some members of city staff to address some of your questions and concerns. But please know the development of that park is a priority. Mm-hmm. It's an issue. The issues at the moment relate to funding, and then there are also some logistical issues. But it is very much a goal of this council and the city to see that developed, and we appreciate your interest very much.
Okay. Do you know at all when the bulldozers will be coming in at all? Will that be happening this summer?
Or? Yeah.
Okay, you're not sure. Okay, thank you. I'll wait for that.
Well, Are there additional citizen comments? No citizen comments, okay?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
With the citizen comment about the pollution that actually goes into the river, I know that that happens during hard rains and so forth. So I think our small amount of runoff compared to what we heard as testimony here probably isn't a lot. Not that DEQ would forgive it, but, you know.
Put it into context, sure. Okay. If there's nothing further, we have future meetings on, but we do not have a work meeting anymore scheduled for May the 22nd, this Thursday, that's canceled. We do have a regular meeting at 7:30 on June the 2nd, and then a regular meeting and a work meeting beginning at 6:30 p.m. on June the 16th. We've already excused the absence of Councilwoman Seibel Koenig, so at this time I would seek a motion to adjourn at 9:56 p.m.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.